If you grew up gaming in the 90s, then you have to have lived under a rock not to have heard of Counter-Strike Source. In theory, it's a successor to Counter-Strike 1.6. And before you run to the comments to tell me that there was a second game just before Source, just hold your horses. There'll be more on that later. And it's also the predecessor to Global Offensive, which has gone on to become one of the biggest games of all time and still holds pro tournaments to this day. For me personally, the game is part of a golden generation of gaming for first-person shooters, forming part of my own holy trinity, if you will, including Half-Life 2 and Day of Defeat Source. All games coincidentally fall under the same engine. And if you hadn't guessed it, it's the Source engine. Counter-Strike is second only to Day of Defeat in my list of favourite Valve games ever. Why? Because it was so fucking awesome. The game design, the minute details within maps, the ability to chat with other players either through text or voice, the ability to tag a wall with your favourite picture, although lots of people use this to spray some rather dubious content back in the day, and ultimately the sheer enjoyment of those classic CS maps. Who can forget being hurled backwards after a filing cabinet fell over an office? The sheer difficulty of getting inside the factory of CTs on Assault, and 1.6 sweats who confine themselves to playing Dust 2 24/7, making the map incredibly difficult to play for casuals. I'm sure there'll be contrary opinions. I'm well aware that amongst some of the CS community, Source is often seen as the least popular entry in the series. There's a number of reasons for this, and I'm sure that I'm going to cover them, and I hopefully will provide all of the context to this by the end of the video. And I will also provide some balance to celebrate this iconic game. But for lots of casuals, Source really was the way to go. So let's dive in. Counter-Strike Source was released on the 1st of November 2004. It's now incredibly 18 years since it was released. Christ, I feel old. The game consists of a whole host of different maps, and you can either play on rotation servers or on a 24/7 server if you just wanted to jam on your favourite map. There are also mod maps created specifically when you were playing zombies, as an example. And really, the objectives were that you had to defuse the bomb, typically, rescue a hostage, or kill the opposing team. This was split into rounds, and at the end of the map's time limit, or win limit, the team with the most round wins. And then for those of us who were used to having the game do the matchmaking for us, well, it didn't happen in Source. In fact, it's a regular theme throughout CS games, that the decision to play a map and join a specific server was made by you, the player. Very rarely the case nowadays, and still a novelty for me. Movement decreased your accuracy considerably, making it impossible to fly around the map with a spray and pray mentality. You just simply get shredded in Source. Also, a constant rate of fire dramatically increases the recoil, meaning holding your finger on the trigger really gets you nowhere. You'll need to tap to fire and keep the crosshair central to down your targets. At the time, these mechanics made the game so much more enjoyable, because I felt that whilst it was an easy game to come to grips with, the inability to just run and gun made it so much more tactical, and every shot you took counted, and distance also mattered and played a large factor in damage dealt to an enemy. Now, Source was definitely a more casual game compared to 1.6, and there's no denying that. And I guess this is why there was so much split in the community, and still is, on whether it was actually any good or not. For me and my friends, the casual nature of the game was a major plus. It was easy to come to grips with the game mechanics, the guns were easy to master, and the competitive players were mostly confined to 1.6 for the majority of its run in the mid-2000s. This made it simple to recommend the game to friends and get them playing the game regularly with you. Nobody wants to pick up a brand new game and be instantly annihilated by veteran players or people who know every nook and cranny to hide in to get the best advantage. But there were also notable issues with the game as well. Some issues that people really took umbrage with. The first was the game even necessary? I mentioned at the beginning of the game that, in theory, it was the successor to 1.6, but there was another CS title that was released in March of 2004. That title was Condition Zero. The release of Source virtually killed Condition Zero off. I mean, was there really space for two new CS releases in the space of 7 months? And to take this argument one step further, CS veterans would probably argue that both were totally unnecessary. You see, 1.6 was still at the height of its popularity, and high-stakes tournaments of cash were still being played. So with all the tournaments, money, and stakes available on 1.6, why would these competitive players even switch? There was also a strong feeling that Source was massively underdeveloped for competitive play, something I can't really argue about, as the hitboxes with Source were gigantic compared to 1.6. Change is always hated before the competition dies off, and 1.6 was very much still at the peak of its powers. Finally, after scouring the forums, I found a huge amount of hatred really for the physics props. People bemoaned being thrown down corridors towards enemies after a shelf falls over next to you, or getting trapped between filing cabinets again in office after a grenade blows up between the three of them and you. Understandable criticisms, but for me, they made the game even more unique at the time. So, to the modern day, what's it like now, you ask? Well, it's a different game for sure. There's still quite a lot of servers in operation, and the majority of the maps are still available to play. Alongside 24/7 servers, if you still want to play your favourite map over and over and over again, the gameplay remains the same, and it's still fucking awesome to play. A couple of issues have arisen as the result of old age, though, as you can probably guess, is that the player count is now very low. I mean, it is 18 years old, so that is expected. But what it's done is add a pay-to-play element almost to the servers. Most servers offer a premium service now, allowing you to donate monthly and have access to a wide range of overpowered perks, such as unlimited nades, added health, health regeneration, speed boosts, damage reg, and access to restricted weapons, such as the AWP. I don't think I need to elaborate on that final perk for you to understand how frustrating that can be. And while this sucks, it's understandable that servers need financial support to continue going, and offering perks such as these are a great way to incentivize people. In closing, games naturally fade away as popularity swings to the newest and shiniest releases. So its decline over time, especially the release of Go, is no surprise. The sad thing about this game, though, is that if it was released maybe 2 or 3 years later, then it may have had a significantly different reception, a larger player base, and gradually developed competitive scene. For me, though, this release was simply one for the casuals, and I love that. Thanks for listening. If you made it this far, let me know your thoughts on Source and what you'd like for me to cover next. Ciao.